6 months later, Marcus stood in the center of what had once been a sterile crystal valley and was now a thriving agricultural paradise that defied every conventional understanding of planetary ecology. The original test plot had expanded into thousands of acres of integrated farmland where earth crops grew alongside specially adapted plants the planetary consciousness had helped design. The transformation was breathtaking. Rolling fields of grain swayed in perfect harmony with geometric gardens where crystalline trees grew beside earth vegetables. Streams that had once run pure and lifeless now carried nutrients and sediments in carefully balanced cycles that fed both organic and crystal life. The very air hummed with the complex harmonics of a world where three different forms of consciousness, human, dragon, and planetary, had learned to think and work as one. The harvest projections are beyond anything we imagined, Verdanus reported, his emerald scales now bearing faint crystal patterns that marked his growing connection to the planetary consciousness. Yield per acre is 5 times higher than Earth averages, and the nutritional content is significantly enhanced. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on something even more remarkable than agricultural productivity. In the distance, he could see the first groups of human colonists working alongside dragons in fields that responded to their thoughts and intentions. The planetary consciousness had learned to interpret human emotions and desires, adjusting growing conditions in real time based on the farmers' understanding of what their crops needed. "It's becoming a genuine partnership," he said to Luminara, who had become his closest collaborator in the ongoing project. "The planet doesn't just support agriculture, it participates in it. It's learning to think like a farmer." The silver dragon's response carried notes of deep satisfaction. "And we have learned to think like gardeners rather than simply energy manipulators. The integration has changed us all." This was true in ways that none of them had anticipated. The dragons had found that their connection to the planetary consciousness enhanced their own abilities, allowing them to work with life energy in ways they had never imagined. They could now encourage plant growth with their thoughts, direct the flow of nutrients through soil networks, and even communicate directly with the crops they tended. For the human colonists who had arrived over the past months, the experience was equally transformative. Working in partnership with a conscious planet had given them insights into agriculture that generations of Earth farmers had never achieved. They could sense the needs of their crops through the planetary network, detect problems before they became visible, and coordinate their efforts across vast distances through the crystal communication system. "We're not just growing food," Marcus had explained to the latest group of arrivals from Earth. "We're participating in a conversation between life and the world that supports it. Every action you take in the fields becomes part of a planet-wide dialogue about growth, nurturing, and sustainability." But the implications extended far beyond agriculture. News of the experiment on Zephyria Secundus had reached other worlds, carried by dragon traders and human explorers. Representatives from dozens of species had requested permission to visit and study what was being called the first truly conscious biosphere in the galaxy. "The Andromedans arrive next week," Pyrian informed Marcus as they walked through fields where earth wheat grew in spirals around crystal formations that channeled and amplified growing energy. "They're particularly interested in our soil integration techniques, and the Centaurians want to know if the process can be adapted to water-based ecosystems," Thalassa added. Her wave-colored scales now shot through with silver threads that connected her directly to the planet's water management systems. Marcus smiled at the irony. He had come to Zephyria Secundus as a simple farmer asked to help with an agricultural problem. Now he was at the center of what was becoming a galactic revolution in the understanding of consciousness and planetary ecology. "The most interesting request came from Earth itself," Astralin said, her starlight scales now pulsing in perfect synchronization with the crystal formations around them. "Several governments want to know if Earth's biosphere could be enhanced using similar techniques." This possibility had been much discussed among the colonists and dragons. Earth's ecosystems were suffering from centuries of industrial damage and climate change. The techniques they had developed on Zephyria Secundus might offer solutions to environmental problems that had seemed insurmountable. "Earth's biosphere is already conscious in its own way," Marcus said thoughtfully. "The question is whether we can help it become more consciously integrated, more able to actively participate in its own healing and management." Umbros approached, his midnight scales now bearing patterns of silver and gold, that marked his role as coordinator between the dragon community and the planetary consciousness. We have received a formal invitation from the Galactic Council to present our work at the next Consciousness Symposium. They want to understand how 3 different forms of awareness have achieved such seamless integration. Marcus looked around at the transformed landscape, marveling at how far they had come from that first morning, when 7 dragons had landed in his wheat field. The valley now hosted a community of over 1,000 beings, humans, dragons, and various visiting species, all working together in harmony with a planetary consciousness that had evolved from curious observer to active partner. "I think the real breakthrough wasn't technical," he said finally. "It was learning that consciousness isn't limited to biological forms. The planet was always aware. It just needed to learn how to communicate and cooperate rather than simply analyze and absorb." Pharos joined the conversation, his copper scales now bearing intricate crystal inlays that allowed him direct access to the planet's mineral management systems. "And we learned that true agriculture isn't about imposing our will on the land, but about joining a conversation that was already taking place between soil, water, air, and the forces that shape them." As if responding to their words, the crystal formations around them began to pulse with new patterns, harmonics that Marcus had learned to recognize as the planet's way of expressing contentment and joy. The planetary consciousness had found purpose in nurturing life, and that purpose had transformed it from a lonely observer into an active participant in the grand experiment of existence. "The children are the most remarkable part," Luminara observed, gesturing toward a group of young humans and dragons playing in fields where crystal flowers bloomed alongside earth daisies. "They don't see any separation between organic and inorganic consciousness. To them, the planet is simply another friend to talk with and learn from." Marcus watched the children, who could communicate with the planetary consciousness as easily as they talked with each other. They represented something entirely new, beings who had grown up thinking of worlds as partners rather than resources, who saw consciousness as a spectrum rather than a binary distinction between alive and not alive. "They're going to change the galaxy," he said quietly. "A generation that grows up knowing that planets can think and respond. That consciousness comes in forms we're only beginning to understand. They'll approach everything differently." As the day drew to a close, Marcus found himself standing on a hill overlooking the transformed valley. The setting sun cast golden light across fields where 3 different forms of consciousness had learned to work together, creating something more beautiful and productive than any of them could have achieved alone. The dragons had found their new home and discovered abilities they never knew they possessed. The planetary consciousness had found purpose and companionship in nurturing life. The human colonists had found a new way of living that was in perfect harmony with their environment. But perhaps most importantly, they had all discovered that consciousness was far more diverse and wonderful than any of them had imagined. In learning to work together, they had opened the door to possibilities that none of them had dreamed of. When a simple farmer first agreed to help a herd of alien dragons with their agricultural problems. As the first stars appeared in the alien sky, the crystal formations began their evening song, harmonics that now carried the voices of all 3 consciousnesses, blended into music that spoke of cooperation, growth, and the infinite potential that emerged when different forms of awareness learned to listen to each other. Marcus smiled and headed home, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new discoveries in the ongoing conversation between life and the conscious world that chose to nurture it. He had helped solve the dragon's agricultural problem, but in doing so, he had become part of something far greater, a transformation that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The simple farmer had indeed never imagined what would happen when those dragons approached him for help. None of them had imagined that helping with farming would lead to the birth of a new form of planetary consciousness that would change the very definition of what it meant for a world to be alive. 2 weeks after the bacterial cultures had been successfully established, Marcus was ready for the next phase of the great experiment. The test plot now hummed with microscopic life, and the planetary consciousness had become remarkably adept at maintaining optimal conditions while allowing for the natural variations that kept the soil ecosystem healthy. The fungi are the next crucial step, Marcus explained to the assembled dragons as he prepared spore cultures that had been carefully transported from Earth. They'll form networks through the soil, connecting and supporting the bacterial communities. But fungi are more complex than bacteria. They have different needs and behaviors. Luminara observed the preparation process with intense interest. The planetary consciousness is eager to learn about these new life forms. It has become quite proud of its success with the bacteria. Marcus smiled at the idea of a planet taking pride in its gardening skills. Over the past 2 weeks, he had developed an oddly personal relationship with the vast crystalline intelligence. While they still needed the dragons to facilitate communication, he was beginning to sense the planet's moods and intentions directly. The fungi will be a bigger challenge for our planetary partner, Marcus warned. Bacterial communities are relatively simple. They grow, reproduce, die, and decompose in fairly predictable patterns. Fungi form complex networks that can extend for miles underground. They communicate with each other and with plant roots through chemical signals. They can even share resources between distant parts of their networks. Verdanus leaned closer, his emerald eyes reflecting Marcus's work. So the fungi will create a communication network within the soil itself? Exactly. In a mature ecosystem, the fungal network acts like the internet of the soil, connecting plants to each other, sharing nutrients and water, transmitting chemical warnings about pests or diseases, even helping plants form alliances with beneficial bacteria. The concept fascinated the planetary consciousness, which immediately began pulsing with complex patterns as it contemplated the implications. Marcus could feel its excitement through the crystal resonance. The idea of a biological communication network within its own structure was apparently thrilling. To the mineral intelligence, it wants to participate in the fungal network. Astralin translated, her starlight scale shimmering with the planet's enthusiasm. It believes it might be able to enhance and expand the communication capabilities of the organic network. Marcus paused in his preparation, considering the implications. That could be incredible, but we need to be careful. Fungal networks are delicate systems that evolved over millions of years. If the planet tries to enhance them too quickly or dramatically, it could disrupt the very connections it's trying to improve. This concern led to another extended discussion between Marcus, the dragons, and the planetary consciousness. The crystal mind was learning patience, but its enthusiasm for each new biological concept sometimes led to overly ambitious interventions. The planet understands, Pyrian assured him after the discussion concluded. It will observe the natural development of the fungal network first, learning its patterns and rhythms before attempting any enhancements. Marcus began introducing the fungal spores to the test plot, working with the same careful precision he had used with the bacteria. The planetary consciousness watched with what Marcus had learned to recognize as intense curiosity, maintaining optimal moisture and temperature, while carefully adjusting soil chemistry to support fungal growth. Within days, the first fungal threads began to appear in the soil samples, delicate white networks spreading through the bacterial communities. The planetary consciousness was clearly fascinated by these new life forms, and Marcus could sense its attention focused on every aspect of their development. It's asking questions, Umbros reported as complex harmonic patterns echoed through the crystal formations. It wants to understand how the fungi know where to grow, how they find and connect to bacterial communities, how they determine which connections to maintain and which to abandon. Those are actually very sophisticated questions, Marcus said, impressed by the planet's rapid learning. Fungal behavior involves chemical signaling, resource gradients, and genetic programming that we're still trying to understand ourselves. As the fungal networks established themselves, something unexpected began to happen. The crystal formations around the test plot started to resonate in new patterns, harmonics that seemed to echo the chemical signals the fungi were using to communicate with each other. The planetary consciousness is learning to interpret fungal communications, Thalassa observed, her wave-colored scales shifting in rhythm with the new crystal patterns. It's beginning to understand biological language. Marcus watched in amazement as the test plot became a conversation between organic and crystalline intelligence. The fungi sent chemical signals through their networks, and the crystals responded with harmonic patterns that somehow enhanced and amplified those signals. This is incredible, Marcus said, studying his soil analysis data. The fungal networks are developing faster and more extensively than anything I've seen on Earth. The planetary consciousness isn't just supporting their growth, it's actively participating in their Communication networks. Pharos moved closer to examine the data. Is this beneficial or harmful to the fungi? It appears to be beneficial, Marcus replied, still amazed by what he was seeing. The enhanced communication is allowing the fungi to coordinate their growth more efficiently, avoid conflicts between different networks, and optimize resource sharing. It's like they have access to a planetary coordination system. The success with the fungal networks opened the door to the next phase of the experiment. Marcus began introducing more complex soil organisms, protozoa that would graze on bacteria and fungi, keeping their populations in balance, and beneficial nematodes that would perform similar regulatory functions. Each new introduction required careful negotiation with the planetary consciousness, which had to learn to recognize and support increasingly complex forms of life. But the crystal intelligence was proving to be a remarkably fast learner, and its enthusiasm for biological diversity seemed to grow with each successful addition to the soil ecosystem. The planet is developing preferences, Astrolin noted as they introduced a particularly beneficial species of soil nematode. It seems to favor organisms that contribute to the overall stability and complexity of the ecosystem. That's a sign of growing wisdom, Marcus said. The planet is learning to think like an ecologist, understanding that diversity and complexity lead to stability and resilience. 3 weeks after beginning the soil development project, Marcus was ready for the ultimate test, introducing the first plants. He had chosen carefully, selecting hardy pioneer species, known for their ability to thrive in challenging conditions and their beneficial relationships with soil organisms. These are earth grasses, he explained to the dragons as he prepared the seeds. Not glamorous, but incredibly important. They'll be the first test of whether our soil ecosystem can actually support plant life. The planetary consciousness had grown quiet as Marcus prepared for planting, its attention focused with almost overwhelming intensity on the small seeds in his hands. Through the crystal resonance, Marcus could sense the planet's excitement and nervousness about this crucial moment. It understands that this is the real test, Luminara observed. Everything we've built has been leading to this moment. Marcus planted the first seeds with ceremony appropriate to the historic moment. As he pressed each seed into the carefully prepared soil, he could feel the vast attention of the planetary consciousness focused on the tiny packages of genetic potential. Now we wait, he said, settling back to observe. Germination should begin within a few days if conditions are right. But they didn't have to wait days. Within hours, the first green shoots were pushing through the soil, growing with vigor that surprised even Marcus. The planetary consciousness had apparently decided that if it was going to support plant life, it would do so with enthusiasm. The growth rate is extraordinary, Verdana said, watching the grass shoots reach toward the alien sun. Is this normal for Earth plants? Not even close, Marcus replied, studying the rapidly developing seedlings. They're growing 3 or 4 times faster than normal. The planetary consciousness isn't just supporting their growth, it's optimizing every aspect of their environment. Over the following days, the test plot transformed into a patch of thriving grassland that seemed almost to glow with health and vitality. The plants were connected through the fungal networks to the planetary consciousness itself, creating a level of environmental integration that went far beyond anything Marcus had imagined possible. We've done it, Pyrion said, his golden scales reflecting the green of the new grass. We've successfully established organic life on our new world. But Marcus was thinking bigger. We've done more than that, he said, watching the grass wave in the alien breeze while crystal formations pulsed in harmony with its growth. We've created something entirely new, a conscious partnership between life and the world that supports it. This isn't just agriculture. This is the birth of a new form of planetary consciousness. The implications were staggering, and Marcus knew that what they had accomplished here would. Marcus spent the next day learning to communicate with the planet, which was not something they had covered in agricultural school. The process was unlike anything he had ever experienced. With the dragons acting as interpreters, he found himself in mental contact with a consciousness so vast and alien that it made him dizzy. The planetary mind didn't think in words or images, but in patterns of energy and crystalline resonance. Concepts that Marcus could express in a simple sentence took hours to translate into forms the crystal consciousness could understand. The idea of cooperation was particularly challenging. The planet's experience was entirely based on analysis and absorption, breaking things down to understand their component parts. It's like trying to explain color to someone who was born blind, Marcus said to Luminara, as they took a break from the exhausting communication process. The planet understands energy patterns, chemical compositions, molecular structures, but the concept of things working together to mutual benefit is completely foreign. We are making progress, the Silver Dragon assured him. The planetary consciousness is beginning to understand that organic life operates on principles different from crystal growth. It is curious about your proposal. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the strain of mental contact with something so fundamentally different from human consciousness. What exactly does it understand so far? Verdanis joined the conversation, his emerald scales reflecting the late afternoon light. It understands that organic life requires dynamic equilibrium rather than static perfection. It is fascinated by the concept of change that leads to stability rather than decay. That's actually a pretty sophisticated insight, Marcus admitted. The idea that a living system maintains itself through constant change is something that took human scientists centuries to fully understand. Astralin approached, her starlight scales shimmering with excitement. The planetary consciousness wants to attempt what it calls cooperative observation rather than analytical absorption. It believes it may be possible to study organic life without destroying it. That would be a good start, Marcus said cautiously, but I need to understand what that means exactly. We can't afford to lose our bacterial cultures to well-intentioned planetary curiosity. Over the next several hours, the dragons worked to facilitate a more direct communication between Marcus and the crystal consciousness. The experience was overwhelming, like trying to have a conversation with a mountain range that could think. The planetary mind was ancient beyond human comprehension, patient in ways that made geological time seem hasty, and utterly fascinated by the brief, flickering complexity of organic life. Through the connection, Marcus began to understand what the planet had been experiencing during the dragon's previous attempts at agriculture. Each time they introduced Earth life, the crystal consciousness had detected the new energy patterns and immediately began studying them with the same intensity a scientist might apply to a new discovery. But its method of study involved complete molecular analysis, which naturally destroyed the very life it was trying to understand. It's like trying to understand music by taking apart the instruments, Marcus explained to the assembled dragons. The planet has been so focused on the components that it missed the symphony. The planetary consciousness responded to this analogy with what Marcus could only interpret as delight. Music was a concept it could understand. The crystal formations had been created to resonate in harmony with the planet's core, creating complex acoustic patterns that served as both art and communication. The idea that life might operate on similar principles of harmony and rhythm resonated deeply with the crystal mind. It wants to try a different approach. Pyrrhion translated as new patterns of light pulsed through the surrounding crystals. Instead of analyzing our organic introductions immediately, it proposes to observe their energy patterns over time, learning to recognize the signatures of healthy life versus dying life. That could work, Marcus said thoughtfully. If the planet can learn to distinguish between healthy biological activity and decomposition, it might be able to avoid interfering with living systems while still satisfying its curiosity. But as he prepared to begin the soil inoculation process, Marcus realized there was still a fundamental problem. Even if the planet agrees not to analyze our bacteria to death, we still need to establish the right conditions for them to thrive. Bacteria are delicate. They need specific temperature ranges, moisture levels, pH balance, and nutrient availability. Thalassa moved closer, her wave-colored scales shifting in patterns that reminded Marcus of ocean currents. Perhaps the planetary consciousness could help maintain optimal conditions rather than simply observing them. This suggestion triggered an intense discussion between the dragons and the crystal mind, conducted in harmonics that Marcus felt more than heard. The crystalline formations around them pulsed with increasingly complex patterns as the planetary consciousness considered the implications of active cooperation rather than passive observation. It is, intrigued, Umbros reported finally. The concept of using its capabilities to nurture rather than analyze is completely novel. But it appeals to the planet's desire to understand life from the inside rather than through dissection. Marcus felt a spark of hope. What kind of capabilities are we talking about? What can a planetary consciousness actually do? The answer came as a direct demonstration. The crystal formations around them began to glow more brightly, and Marcus felt the temperature in their immediate area rise several degrees. The air became slightly more humid, and he could sense minerals in the soil shifting into more available forms. The planet can control local environmental conditions with incredible precision, Astrolin explained. Temperature, humidity, soil chemistry, even electromagnetic fields. It could create perfect growing conditions for any organism we introduce. That's incredible, Marcus breathed. But it's also dangerous. Bacteria are adapted to natural variations in their environment. Perfect conditions maintained artificially could actually weaken them over time, making them dependent on constant intervention. This concern sparked another extended discussion with the planetary consciousness. The crystal mind was learning rapidly, but each new concept required careful explanation and translation. The idea that life required challenges as well as support, that stress and adaptation were essential components of biological health, was particularly difficult to convey. It understands now, Luminara said eventually. The planetary consciousness will provide supportive conditions, but with natural variation that mimics the patterns of organic worlds. It is actually excited by the challenge of creating artificial naturalness. Marcus couldn't help but smile at that phrase, artificial naturalness. That might be the most accurate description of sustainable agriculture I've ever heard. With the planetary consciousness as a cooperative partner, rather than an unwitting saboteur, Marcus began the delicate process of establishing Earth life in alien soil. He started with a small test plot, carefully introducing his most robust bacterial cultures along with organic matter to feed them. The experience was unlike anything in his farming career. As he worked, he could feel the vast attention of the planetary mind focused on every aspect of the process. The crystals around the test plot pulsed with gentle light, and he could sense the planet adjusting soil chemistry in real time, optimizing conditions for bacterial growth while maintaining the natural variations that would keep the organisms healthy. It's working, Verdana said in amazement as the first signs of biological activity appeared in their monitoring equipment. The bacteria are not just surviving, they're thriving. Over the following days, Marcus watched in fascination as the test plot came alive in ways that were visible only through microscopic analysis and chemical testing. Bacterial populations exploded, creating the foundation layer of the soil ecosystem he was trying to build. The planetary consciousness is learning to recognize the signatures of healthy bacterial communities, Pirion observed as complex patterns of light played through the nearby crystals. It can distinguish between beneficial activity and harmful overgrowth. More than that, Marcus said, studying his latest soil samples, it's starting to anticipate problems before they occur. Look at this. The pH started to shift too far acidic yesterday, but the planet corrected it before it could harm the bacterial communities. Thalas's excitement was palpable. So the planetary consciousness is becoming a partner in the agricultural process rather than just an observer? Better than a partner, Marcus replied. It's becoming an incredibly sophisticated environmental management system. With this level of control and responsiveness, we might be able to establish a complete soil ecosystem in weeks rather than months. But even as the test plot showed promising results, Marcus knew they were still in the early stages of a much larger challenge. Bacteria were just the foundation. They still needed to introduce fungi, protozoa, beneficial insects, and eventually plants themselves. Each stage would require the planetary consciousness to learn new forms of cooperation, new ways of supporting rather than analyzing life. There's something else we need to consider, Marcus said as they reviewed the day's progress. If this works, if we successfully establish. The surface of Zephyria Secundus was even more breathtaking than the orbital view had suggested. As their ship descended through the clean atmosphere, Marcus watched vast crystalline formations rise from fertile-looking plains like geometric mountains. The structures weren't random. They formed patterns that spoke of intelligence and purpose, creating a landscape that was both alien and hauntingly beautiful. The dragons had built their settlement in a valley between two crystal ridges, and Marcus was amazed to see how seamlessly their architecture blended with the natural formations. Buildings grown from the same living crystal as their ships curved and spiraled upward. their surfaces alive with gentle patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with some planetary heartbeat he couldn't quite perceive. The crystals are responding to your presence, Verdanis observed as Marcus noticed the patterns shifting toward warmer, more golden hues. They are curious about organic life. This is the first time they have encountered a biological consciousness. Marcus stepped out of the ship onto what felt like the surface of an alien gem. The ground beneath his feet was solid and smooth, formed from the same crystal material but somehow not slippery. The air was crisp and clean, carrying scents that reminded him of ozone and fresh rain, with undertones of something indefinably foreign. The atmospheric composition is nearly identical to Earth's, Luminara explained, noticing him testing the air cautiously. Though there are trace elements here that don't exist in your solar system, they appear to be harmless to organic life. What struck Marcus most powerfully was the silence. Not the silence of death, but the silence of a world waiting. The crystal formations hummed softly with barely audible harmonics, and he could hear the distant sound of wind moving through impossible geometries. But there were no birds, no insects, no rustle of leaves. It was beautiful and perfect and utterly lifeless. "Show me the soil," he said, kneeling to examine the ground beyond the crystal platform. Pirion gestured with one golden wing toward a vast plain that stretched toward the horizon. "The most promising agricultural areas are there. The soil is deep and rich, well-drained but moisture-retentive. By all our measurements, it should support abundant life." Marcus walked to the edge of the crystal area and crouched down, running his hands through the dark, loamy earth. It felt perfect, the right texture, good structure, clearly rich in organic matter. But as he brought a handful closer to his face, he immediately understood the problem. "It smells wrong," he said quietly. "Wrong how?" Thalassa asked, moving closer with obvious concern. "It smells like nothing," Marcus explained, standing and brushing the soil from his hands. "Good soil has a distinctive smell, earthy, rich, alive. This smells like dirt that's been sterilized. All the chemical components are here, but none of the biology." He pulled out one of his portable soil analysis kits and began testing samples. The results confirmed what his nose had already told him. The pH is perfect, nutrient levels are excellent, mineral content is ideal. But there's no biological activity whatsoever. No bacteria, no fungi, no organic acids from decomposition, no root exudates from previous plant growth. It's like soil-flavored sand. Umbros studied the readouts with interest. "We attempted to introduce earth bacteria cultures, but they died within days of introduction." "Did you introduce them gradually, or all at once?" Marcus asked, already suspecting the answer. "We established large colonies immediately," Pharos replied. "We reasoned that greater numbers would ensure survival." Marcus shook his head. "That's like trying to establish a city without first preparing the infrastructure. Bacteria need specific conditions to thrive, and those conditions have to be built up slowly. You probably shocked them to death." He opened one of his sample containers and carefully withdrew a small amount of compost from his own farm. The smell that rose from it, rich, earthy, alive, made him suddenly homesick. "This is living soil," he said, holding it out for the dragons to examine. "It contains billions of organisms in complex relationships that have been developing for decades." Astralin leaned closer, her cosmic senses focused on the small sample. "We can perceive the energy patterns now that you direct our attention to them. Such complexity in such a small space. Each organism seems to be in communication with countless others." "Exactly," Marcus said, his excitement growing as he began to understand the scope of the challenge. "What we need to do is establish a soil ecosystem from scratch. It'll be like creating a miniature world." Over the next several hours, Marcus conducted a thorough survey of the area the dragons had designated for their first agricultural attempt. The site was ideal in almost every way. Gentle slopes for drainage, protection from harsh winds by crystal formations, excellent sun exposure, and abundant fresh water from streams that flowed down from the crystal mountains. "The water is pure," Luminara noted as Marcus tested a stream. "Perhaps too pure. On Earth, your rivers and streams carry sediments and organic matter that feed the soil." "Another piece of the puzzle," Marcus agreed. "We'll need to introduce organic matter into the watershed gradually. But first, we need to establish the basic soil community." He began laying out his plan as the dragons gathered around him in the field that would become their first test plot. "We'll start small, maybe an acre at first. We need to introduce soil organisms in the right sequence, allowing each group to establish itself before adding the next. What sequence? Verdanus asked, his emerald scales catching the afternoon light. Marcus pulled out a notebook and began sketching a diagram. First, we introduce the primary decomposers, bacteria that break down organic matter. They'll need food, so we'll add compost and organic amendments. Once they're established and reproducing, we introduce the secondary decomposers, fungi that form networks through the soil. He continued drawing, his farmer's knowledge combining with half-remembered college biology. Then we add the predators, protozoa and nematodes that eat bacteria and fungi, which sounds counterproductive but actually helps by preventing any one species from taking over. Their waste products also provide nutrients in forms plants can use more easily. Pyrion studied the diagram with growing amazement. This is far more complex than our energy-based systems. Each level depends on all the others? It's a web, not a hierarchy, Marcus explained. Each organism affects every other organism. Change one component and the entire system shifts to compensate. That's why we have to be so careful about how we introduce new elements. And once this system is established? Thalassa asked. Then we can start adding larger organisms, beneficial insects, earthworms, arthropods. Finally, we introduce plants, starting with hardy pioneer species that can tolerate less than perfect conditions, and gradually working up to more demanding crops. Umbros tilted his massive head thoughtfully. How long will this process take? Marcus calculated in his head. If everything goes perfectly, we might have a functioning soil ecosystem in 6 months. Basic crop production in a year. Really productive soil, 3 to 5 years. The dragons exchanged glances, and Marcus could sense their communication even though he couldn't hear it. You seem disappointed, he said. Is that too long? Not disappointed, Luminara assured him quickly. Amazed. We have been trying to force life onto this world for 50 years with no success. You offer us hope of success in a fraction of that time. But, Pharos added hesitantly, we should tell you about the complications we have discovered. Marcus felt his stomach sink. What kind of complications? Astralin gestured toward the crystal formation surrounding them. The crystals are not just geological features. They are part of a planetary consciousness, not alive in the biological sense, but aware. They have been curious about our attempts to introduce organic life. Curious how? Marcus asked warily. They have been absorbing and analyzing everything we introduce, Verdanus explained. Plants, bacteria, organic matter. The crystal networks have been studying them at the molecular level. We believe this is why our previous attempts have failed. The planetary consciousness has been trying to understand organic life by breaking it down into component parts. Marcus stared at the beautiful, harmless-looking crystal formations with new understanding. The planet has been eating everything you've tried to plant. Not eating, Umbros corrected. Studying, but the effect is the same. The crystals absorb organic matter and convert it into energy patterns they can analyze. Unfortunately, this process destroys the very life they are trying to understand. Great, Marcus said, sinking down onto a crystal outcropping. So we're not just fighting sterile soil. We're fighting a planet that sees organic life as something to be dissected and studied. But, Luminara said, her mental voice carrying hope. The crystals have never encountered an organic consciousness that could communicate with them. They have only seen the results of life, not the process of living. Perhaps if they could understand what we are trying to accomplish. Marcus looked up at the silver dragon. You think we can negotiate with a planet? We think, Pyrion said gently, that you might be the first being capable of bridging the gap between organic and crystalline consciousness. The crystals are already responding to your presence differently than they have to anything else we have brought here. As if summoned by his words, the crystal formations around them began. 3 days later, Marcus found himself standing in what could only be described as the most beautiful cargo bay he had ever seen. The dragon ship defied every expectation he had about spacecraft. Instead of cold metal and harsh lighting, the interior was carved from what appeared to be living crystal that glowed with soft, warm light. The walls curved organically, and the floor felt solid yet somehow yielding beneath his feet. His bags and equipment, soil samples, pH meters, microscopes, and containers of beneficial bacteria cultures he had carefully prepared, were secured in alcoves that had grown from the walls to accommodate them perfectly. The dragons had watched with fascination as he explained each tool and sample, their questions revealing both vast knowledge and curious gaps in understanding. "Your vessel is incredible," Marcus said to the silver dragon, who had introduced herself as Luminara. "It doesn't feel like a machine at all." "Because it is not," she replied, her mental voice warm with pride. "This ship is grown, not built. It is a living symbiosis between crystal and energy, shaped by will and tended by love. It will carry us safely across the void between stars." Marcus ran his hand along the nearest wall, feeling a subtle warmth in what might have been a very slow pulse. "Living crystal? How is that possible?" The emerald dragon, who had given his name as Verdanus, moved closer. "On our birth world, all technology was biological. We learned to work with life rather than against it, to encourage growth rather than force construction. The crystals that form our ships and tools are as alive as the trees in your forests, though they think in different ways." "Different ways?" Marcus asked, intrigued. "Crystal thought is slow and deep," explained Astralin, the starlight dragon. "Where you might have a thought in a moment, crystal consciousness might take days or weeks to form a complete idea. But when they do think, their thoughts are pure and clear, without the emotional turbulence that affects biological minds." The ship shuddered gently, and Marcus felt his stomach lurch as they lifted off from Earth. Through the transparent sections of the wall, he watched his farm shrink below, then his state, then the continent itself. Within minutes they were in space, and Earth hung below them like a blue and white jewel. "The journey to Zephyria Secundus will take 4 of your days at maximum velocity," Luminara informed him. "We travel by bending space around us rather than moving through it at conventional speeds. You may experience some disorientation during the transition." Marcus nodded, still mesmerized by the view of Earth. "Will I be able to communicate with people back home? I left word that I was traveling for agricultural consultation work, but if this takes longer than expected—" "Our communication arrays can reach your planet instantly," assured Pyrion, the golden dragon. "Quantum entanglement allows for instantaneous contact across any distance. You may speak with your family and colleagues whenever you wish." As the ship prepared for interstellar travel, Marcus found himself in what the dragons called the observation chamber, a dome-like room with completely transparent walls that offered a panoramic view of space. The dragons had explained that humans often found the journey easier if they could see their surroundings rather than being enclosed in windowless chambers. "I have to ask," Marcus said as stars began to streak past in patterns that hurt his eyes to look at directly. "Why didn't your people develop agriculture on your original world? You're clearly an advanced civilization." Thalassa, the wave-colored dragon, settled beside him with a sound like distant thunder. "We were not always as we are now. In our earliest days, we were simple crystal feeders, absorbing energy directly from our sun and the mineral veins in our world's mountains. We had no need for organic food. Our evolution toward intelligence came through our connection to the planetary consciousness." Umbros, the midnight dragon, continued the explanation. "As we grew more aware, we became guardians and shapers of our world's energy patterns. We learned to direct the flow of power through the crystal networks that covered our planet." Pharos, the copper dragon, added, "By the time we understood that other worlds had different forms of life, organic life like yours, we had already become beings of pure energy and crystalline matter. We could appreciate the beauty of organic life, but we could not truly understand its needs." Marcus watched the stars wheel by in impossible patterns as the ship bent space around itself. "So you've never actually eaten food? Never tasted anything?" The dragons exchanged what he was beginning to recognize as their equivalent of glances. "We absorb energy directly," Luminara said. "But we have wondered about the sensory experiences of organic beings. Your descriptions of taste, of the pleasure you take in flavors and textures, are fascinating to us. We brought some earth food with us," Marcus said, suddenly struck by an idea. "Nothing fancy, just some bread, cheese, and fruit. Would you like to try experiencing food through my senses? If you can read my mind, maybe you can experience what I experience." The excitement among the dragons was palpable. "You would share this with us?" Verdanus asked, his mental voice colored with wonder. "Of course," Marcus said, pulling a simple sandwich from his pack. "It's nothing special, just turkey and cheese on homemade bread. But if you're curious about human sensory experience, this is a good place to start." As Marcus took a bite, he felt the strangest sensation. as if 7 other minds were suddenly paying attention to every aspect of his experience. Through their connection, he could sense their amazement at the complexity of taste, the interplay of textures, the simple pleasure of satisfying hunger. "Incredible," Astrolin whispered. "Such complexity from such simple matter. The bread carries the essence of grain and earth. The cheese holds memories of sunshine and grass through the creature that produced it. And the meat. We can sense the life that was given to sustain your life. Food is one of humanity's great arts," Marcus said, taking another bite and focusing on the flavors for their benefit. "We don't just eat for nutrition. We eat for pleasure, for comfort, for social bonding. Sharing food is how we show love and build community." "This explains much about human civilization," Pyrian observed. "Your species has learned to find joy in the most basic necessities of survival. We admire this greatly." Over the next several hours, as the ship hurtled through folded space toward their destination, Marcus found himself sharing more than just food with his new companions. He told them about his childhood on the farm, about learning from his grandfather how to read the soil and understand the weather. He explained the satisfaction of planting seeds in spring and watching them grow throughout the summer, the deep contentment of a successful harvest. In return, the dragons shared their own memories, the majesty of their crystal cities singing in harmonic resonance with their planet's core, the sorrow of watching their sun fade and their world grow cold, the desperate search across the galaxy for a new home. They showed him visions of their birth world in its prime, towers of living crystal that caught and amplified starlight, gardens of crystal flowers that bloomed in response to the emotions of those who tended them, vast libraries where knowledge was stored in crystalline matrices that could be accessed by touch. "Your world sounds beautiful," Marcus said after experiencing a memory of Verdanus flying through a forest of crystal trees that chimed like bells in the wind. "Do you miss it?" "Every moment," Luminara admitted. "But we have learned that dwelling on loss serves no purpose. We prefer to focus on building something new, something that honors both what we were and what we might become." "That's very wise," Marcus said. "And very human, actually. Farmers understand that better than most. You can't keep growing the same crop in the same field forever. Sometimes you have to let something die so that something new can be born. Perhaps that is why we were drawn to your species," Umbros mused. "You understand the cycles of death and renewal, of ending and beginning. You know that change is not always loss." As the journey continued, Marcus began to understand that he wasn't just traveling to help the dragons solve an agricultural problem. He was becoming part of something larger, a bridge between two very different forms of life, a translator between the cosmic perspective of the dragons and the intimate, ground-level understanding of human farmers. "We are approaching the transition point," Astrolin announced. "Prepare yourself for the shift back to normal space." Marcus gripped the edges of his seat as reality seemed to twist around the ship. For a moment that felt like eternity, he existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, seeing colors that had no names and feeling the weight of infinite possibility pressing against his consciousness. Then, with a sensation like stepping from a rushing river onto solid ground, they emerged into normal space. Before them hung Zephyria Secundus exactly as it had appeared in the hologram, but somehow more real, more present. The crystal formations caught the light of the system's young star and threw it back in spectacular displays of refracted radiance. "Welcome to our new home," Luminara said softly. "Welcome to the greatest challenge your species has ever faced." The silver dragon stepped back and began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. The air above the wheat field shimmered like heat waves, and suddenly Marcus was looking at a three-dimensional image floating in space. A hologram more advanced than anything human technology could produce. The image showed a planet from orbit, and Marcus caught his breath at its stark beauty. The world was covered in crystalline formations that caught and reflected light in spectacular patterns, creating aurora-like displays across the surface. Mountain ranges rose like geometric sculptures, their peaks sharp and gleaming, but there was no green anywhere, no sign of organic life. "This is Zephyria Secundus," the silver dragon explained. "Our new home. The planet is rich in rare minerals. The gravity is suitable for both our species, and the atmospheric composition is nearly identical to both our birth world and your Earth." The image shifted, zooming in to show the surface in detail. Marcus could see vast plains of rich, dark soil stretching between the crystal formations. Rivers flowed clean and clear, and the temperature readings displayed in the corner of the hologram showed a climate similar to Earth's temperate zones. "The soil looks perfect," Marcus said, studying the readings that somehow appeared in his mind in English. "Mineral content is excellent, pH levels are good, moisture retention looks ideal. This should be perfect farmland." The emerald dragon moved closer and the hologram shifted to show close-up images of the soil itself. "That is exactly what our analysis indicated. But observe what happens when we attempt to grow earth plants." The image changed to show time-lapse footage of various attempts at planting. Marcus watched as earth seeds were placed in the alien soil, watered, tended carefully. The seeds would sprout, sometimes even develop into small seedlings. But then they would inevitably wither and die, their leaves turning black and falling away. "We tried plants from 17 different worlds," the Midnight Dragon said. "The result is always the same. Initial growth, then rapid decay and death." Marcus frowned, his farmer's mind engaging with the puzzle. "What about native plant life? Surely the planet had its own ecosystem before you arrived." The wave-colored dragon's expression grew sad. "The planet appears to have never developed organic life. The soil contains all the chemical components necessary for plant growth, but it has never hosted living organisms. It is, as your scientists might say, sterile." "That's impossible," Marcus said immediately. "Soil isn't just minerals and chemicals. It's a living ecosystem. Billions of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, insects, worms, they all work together to create the conditions that plants need to thrive." The golden dragon's eyes widened with interest. "Living soil? We analyzed the mineral content, the chemical composition, but we did not consider microscopic life." Marcus began to pace, his excitement growing as he understood the problem. "You're trying to plant in dead dirt. It's like trying to grow a garden in sand or pure clay. The plants can't access the nutrients properly because there's no biological activity to process them." He turned to face the dragons, gesturing enthusiastically. "The reason earth plants can grow almost anywhere on our planet is because our soil is alive. Every handful contains more microorganisms than there are people on Earth. They break down organic matter, convert nutrients into forms plants can use, form symbiotic relationships with root systems, fight off harmful bacteria, regulate moisture and pH levels naturally." The copper dragon tilted its massive head thoughtfully. "So the solution would be to introduce these microorganisms to our world?" "It's not that simple," Marcus said, his mind racing through the implications. "Different plants need different soil communities. You can't just dump earth bacteria onto an alien planet and hope for the best. The ecosystem has to be built carefully, layer by layer, with the right balance of organisms." The Starlight Dragon spoke up. "This is knowledge we do not possess. Our understanding of life is focused on the grand scale, the movement of energy through matter, the transformation of elements, the binding forces that hold molecules together. These tiny life forms you speak of are beyond our perception." Marcus looked around at the dragons with growing understanding. "You're too big. Not just physically, but conceptually. You think in terms of planetary systems and cosmic forces, but agriculture happens at the microscopic level first, then builds up from there." The silver dragon nodded slowly. "This explains much. We attempted to use our power to force growth, to channel energy directly into the plants, but we were addressing the symptoms, not the cause." "Exactly," Marcus said. "Plants aren't just biological machines that you can power up with energy. They're part of a complex web of relationships. The plant feeds the soil organisms with sugars from its roots, and the soil organisms feed the plant with nutrients they've processed. It's a partnership that's been evolving for millions of years." The Emerald Dragon's excitement was palpable. "And you understand these partnerships? You know how to create them?" Marcus laughed, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "I know some of it. Farmers have been working with soil biology for thousands of years, though we didn't always understand the science behind it. We knew about crop rotation, composting, letting fields lie fallow, introducing beneficial insects and worms. Modern agriculture has gotten away from some of these practices, but the knowledge is still there. What would you need to help us?" The Midnight Dragon asked directly. Marcus thought carefully before answering. "First, I'd need samples of your soil to analyze properly. Not just chemical analysis, but biological analysis to see exactly what's missing. Then I'd need to design a program to introduce the right organisms in the right sequence. It would take time, maybe years, to build a healthy soil ecosystem from scratch." "Years?" The copper dragon sounded disappointed. "Building an ecosystem can't be rushed," Marcus explained. But the good news is that once it's established, it becomes self-sustaining and keeps improving. The first year might produce modest crops, but by the 5th year, you could have soil that's more productive than anything on Earth. The wave-colored dragon moved closer. You speak of this as though you are already committed to helping us. Marcus realized that somewhere during the conversation, he had indeed made up his mind. The challenge fascinated him, and the opportunity to apply agricultural knowledge on an entirely new world was irresistible. I suppose I am, but I'll need help from other experts, soil scientists, microbiologists, ecologists. This isn't a one-person job. We can provide transportation for additional humans, the Silver Dragon said quickly. Our ships can carry many passengers safely. Ships? Marcus looked around. I don't see any ships. The Starlight Dragon gestured with one wing toward the sky. They are cloaked in high orbit. We learned long ago that sudden appearances of large spacecraft tend to cause panic among developing civilizations. Marcus chuckled. Probably a good policy. Though I have to ask, why come to me first? Why not contact governments or universities or major agricultural companies? The Golden Dragon's response surprised him. We have been observing your species for some time. We have seen how your large institutions operate. They would want to study us, control us, use our technology for warfare or profit. You, however, care only about making things grow. Besides, the Emerald Dragon added, we needed someone who would believe us and respond with curiosity rather than fear. Your psychological profile suggested you were adaptable and open-minded. You have a psychological profile on me? Marcus asked, amused rather than disturbed. We have been watching your farm for several months, the Silver Dragon admitted. We needed to understand human agricultural practices before making contact. We observed your methods, your problem-solving approach, your treatment of the land and animals. You passed every test we devised. Marcus shook his head in wonder. So when do we leave for your world? Whenever you are ready, the Midnight Dragon replied. But we should warn you. The journey will take several of your days even with our fastest ships. And once you see the scope of what we face, you may wish to return to gather supplies and additional experts. Marcus looked around at his farm, at the wheat rippling in the morning breeze, at the life he had built here. It was a good life, a simple life, but the opportunity before him was beyond anything he had ever dreamed. I'll need to make arrangements for someone to take care of the farm while I'm gone, he said finally. And I'll want to bring soil samples from here, along with some equipment and reference materials. The Copper Dragon's relief was evident. You will truly help us? I'll do everything I can, Marcus promised. But remember, I'm just a farmer. I can't work miracles. The Silver Dragon's eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement. Marcus Chen, your entire species specializes in working miracles. You take dead matter and make it live. You take barren ground and make it bloom. If that is not magic, then magic has no meaning. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he watched the morning sun rise over his wheat fields. The farm had been in his family for 3 generations, and he took pride in every acre of the sprawling property. At 42, he had weathered droughts, floods, and market crashes, but nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen on this ordinary Tuesday morning. He was checking the irrigation system when he heard it, a sound like thunder rolling across a clear sky. Marcus looked up, expecting to see storm clouds, but the sky was a brilliant blue. The sound grew louder, more rhythmic, like massive wings beating against the air. That's when he saw them. 7 creatures descended from the eastern horizon, their scales catching the sunlight like polished gemstones. They were enormous, each one the size of a small aircraft with wings that stretched wider than his barn. Dragons. Real, living dragons. Marcus rubbed his eyes, certain he was hallucinating from too much sun exposure, but when he looked again, they were still there. The lead dragon was magnificent, silver scales that seemed to shift color in the light. With intelligent amber eyes that held an ancient wisdom, the others followed in formation, one deep emerald green, another midnight black with purple highlights, a golden one that gleamed like the sun itself, one with scales that shifted between blue and white like ocean waves, a copper-colored dragon with bronze wings, and finally one that appeared to be made of living starlight. They landed in his largest field with surprising grace, their massive forms settling onto the earth without crushing a single wheat stalk. Marcus stood frozen by his pickup truck, his coffee mug forgotten in his hand. The Silver Dragon, clearly the leader, approached him slowly, each step deliberate and careful. When it spoke, Marcus nearly dropped his mug. The voice resonated not just in his ears but somehow in his mind, deep and melodious with undertones that made his bones vibrate. "Human farmer," the dragon said, "we mean you no harm. We are the astral herd of Zephyria Prime, and we have traveled far to find you." Marcus found his voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. "Me? You're looking for me specifically?" The silver dragon's great head nodded, and Marcus could see his own reflection in those amber eyes. "Your reputation precedes you, Marcus Chen. Throughout the galaxy there are stories told of human ingenuity, of your species' ability to nurture life from the most barren soil. We have need of such knowledge." "I'm sorry, but throughout the galaxy, who exactly are you?" Marcus managed to ask, his practical mind trying to process the impossible situation. The emerald dragon stepped forward, speaking in a voice like wind through trees. "We are the last of our kind from Zephyria Prime. Once our world was a paradise of crystal mountains and singing forests. We were the guardians of that world, tending to its life for millennia." The midnight dragon continued, its voice carrying notes of deep sadness. "But our sun began to die, growing cold and distant. Our world became a frozen wasteland. We searched the stars for a new home and found a barren planet in the Andromeda sector. The soil is rich with minerals, the climate is suitable, but nothing will grow." Marcus set down his coffee mug on the truck's hood, his mind racing. "You want my help to farm on an alien planet?" The golden dragon's laughter was like musical chimes. "Your species calls it farming. We call it the great nurturing. We have tried for 50 of your Earth years to make our new world bloom, but we lack the knowledge your kind possesses. We have watched your planet from afar," the wave-colored dragon added, its voice carrying the rhythm of ocean tides. "We have seen how humans transform deserts into gardens, how they make the most stubborn soil yield abundance. This is magic to us." The copper dragon gestured with one massive wing toward Marcus's fields. "Look at what you have accomplished here. These golden grasses wave in the wind like a living sea. The soil beneath our feet practically hums with life. This is beyond our understanding." Marcus looked around at his farm with new eyes. He had never thought of what he did as magical or extraordinary. It was just farming, testing soil, understanding drainage, knowing when to plant and when to harvest, working with the natural rhythms of the earth. "I appreciate the compliment," Marcus said carefully. "But I'm not sure what you think I can do that you can't. I mean, you're dragons. Surely you have power I can't even imagine." The starlight dragon spoke for the first time, its voice like cosmic wind carrying stardust. "Power, yes. We can breathe elements, fire, ice, lightning, and forces your science has not yet named. We can soar between worlds, bend space to cross vast distances, manipulate energy at its most fundamental level, but we cannot make a seed sprout in foreign soil." The silver leader lowered its great head until it was level with Marcus's eyes. "True power is not in destruction or grand displays of force. True power is in creation, in nurturing, in the patience to watch something small become something magnificent. This is the gift of humanity." Marcus felt overwhelmed. "But I'm just one person. I work a few hundred acres. What you're talking about sounds like terraforming an entire planet." "Which brings us to our proposal," the silver dragon said. "We do not ask you to abandon your life here. We ask you to teach us. Come to our world, see what we face, share your knowledge. In return, we offer you something your species has always dreamed of, the stars themselves." The emerald dragon added, "We have technologies that could revolutionize your world. Clean energy that could power your cities for 1,000 years. Medical knowledge that could end disease and extend life. Materials stronger than diamond yet lighter than air." Marcus ran a hand through his hair trying to process everything. "This is insane. Yesterday my biggest problem was aphids in my wheat, and now I'm being recruited by alien dragons to help terraform a planet." "We understand this is much to consider," the silver dragon said gently. "We do not require an answer immediately. But know this. We have spent decades searching the galaxy. We have encountered countless species, beings of great intelligence and power, but none possessed what we need. Only humanity has the gift of making life flourish where there was none before." The morning sun had climbed higher now, casting long shadows across the field. Marcus looked at each dragon in turn, seeing hope in their ancient eyes. Despite the impossibility of it all, he found himself believing them. More than that, he found himself intrigued by the challenge they presented. "If I were to consider this," he said slowly, "I'd need to know more. A lot more. What exactly is wrong with your soil? What's the climate like? What have you already tried? The silver dragon's eyes brightened with what Marcus could only interpret as relief and excitement. You honor us by even considering our request. We have much to show you, much to explain. Will you allow us to share the full scope of our situation? Marcus nodded, knowing that his life had just taken a turn that would change everything.